Hi, welcome to the fifth video in our 9-part series designed to help you prepare for the Salesforce Public Sector Solutions Accredited Professional Exam. This video will cover the fifth key focus area, which is PSS data models and applications for inspection management. In this video, we'll take a close look at inspection management applications along with their associated data models and use cases. Whether you are gearing up for the PSS AP exam or simply want to deepen your understanding of the data model or the implementation of inspection management in PSS, this video will be valuable to you. Additionally, I'll walk through some potential exam questions and highlight the key parts you need to focus on during your exam preparation. Let's get into it. Alright, let's now talk about the preparation tips for inspection management. So similar to license and permit management, we need to understand the PSS standard objects and data model for inspection management, the key junction objects, out-of-the-box functionalities, and out-of-the-box Lightning Web components, understanding licenses and permission sets, and also going through Trailhead exercises for hands-on experience. So in this video, we'll be covering PSS 1.3. So this one is around understanding the business requirements related to managing inspections, configuring PSS inspection components required to manage the processes and the outcomes. When we look at the learning journey, we'll be doing the implementation readiness and the inspection management module under this particular section. So similar to the first topic, we'll be going over POC notes, Trailhead notes, data model hands-on exercises, and help article notes. So specifically for inspection management, there are a few key things we need to know about, which is account, application, assessment object, and visit object and complaints. We'll go over these in a bit more detail later on. And it's important to note that business license applications, individual applications, and complaints have one-to-many relationships with the visit object. Permission set, this is quite important, especially for the exam. So what we are doing here is that if you need to have access to regulatory codes, assessment indicator, assessment task definitions, and other inspection entities access to the objects you need to work with, you need to assign these permission sets. And one thing I forget to put in here is inspection objects as well. And there is actually another one here, which is dynamic assessment access. So first one here, you need to assign the admins or users this particular permission set, public sector access. This one here, this permission set contains the public sector access license. It basically enables users access to all the public sector objects and features. Moving down to public sector field access. So this one here is associated with the public sector field access license. And it basically gives you full access to all inspection related objects and features and read-only access to other objects. Industry's visit. So this one here is associated with the industry's visit license. This license will be important if you need to access industry's visit features. Down here, this is the dynamic assessment access permission set, which includes the dynamic assessment access. So this is for users who need to have, for internal users who need access to dynamic assessment features and objects, so the discovery framework. One thing that's quite important to know is that in your object manager for inspection assessment indicators, these pickless values, you can actually select these values to be associated with violation. So when when the value pick those values are selected as fail or issue, you'll automatically generate a violation record. And this is a list of resources. Again, I'll be posting this in the comments below or the description below. All right, let's take a look at the PLC notes. So in here, we need to know the benefits of the PSS for inspection management. We need to know the different types of inspections managed via this inspection management application and identifying the stakeholders involved. So we'll be going over types of inspections, personas involved, and capabilities and architecture. All right, let's take a look at the types of inspections. So inspections are a very important part in maintaining public safety and ensuring compliance with policies and regulations. And usually inspections would occur in a physical location, but it's quite common that it can be associated with a specific section within a facility as well. So here we need to know the difference between inspections and dynamic assessments. Inspections are usually simpler due to the fact that it uses a fixed set of assessment questions with responses in formats such as text, boolean, percentage, and number. And it doesn't involve conditional logic, and it's got limited editing capability. So usually inspections are built using the visits object, and it can be initiated from objects like business license applications, individual applications, and public complaints. Whereas dynamic assessments, it's more it's a type of OMI script, and it gives you the flexibility to include assessment questions with dependencies and conditional logic. So dynamic assessments are usually for cases that are a bit more complex, and for example, if you need to assess constituent needs for social services or benefits like care plans, this is a good use case for dynamic assessments. So you can schedule a dynamic assessment on these objects: business license applications, individual applications, care plans, public complaints, visits, and referrals. So a lot of the inspections are related to license and permit applications, which we've talked about in the previous section. So usually what happens is that inspections will happen after people apply for their licenses or permits. So for example, if there's permits like health and safety approvals, inspection would usually happen after the first review of the constituent's application. If there is a violation, the constituent will be assigned enforcement actions, and after these violations are corrected, the license or permit is issued to the constituent. And sometimes these inspections can occur over multiple stages as well. So it's quite common that you need to pass several inspections before your application can be approved. So in this example here, to get a building permit, you'll need to submit your construction plans to approval to the city's building and department office. The inspector will then get assigned, who will go out to the site and ensuring compliance with regulations at every stage of the building and development. And if electrical is involved, then additional inspectors will need to get involved to make sure that the electrical or plumbing work also meet regulations. And this is where the inspection management app comes in, which is mobile friendly, and this can be used by the inspectors to allow them to go through all the tasks that's required to complete for each visit. And there are also cases where inspections might not be related to licenses and permit applications. So for example, community events. Carnivals that usually need to go through random checks to ensure the rides are secure to public. So there's usually a safety protocol that's required to prevent these accidents. So there might be other things like emergency response management as well. So before a natural disaster, the volunteers will be recruited and conduct visits to check that precautions are taken for public safety, such as making sure sandbags are stacked. And there might be security inspections as well. So for example, airport will enforce a strict check-in process involving identification and transit through metal detectors. So these are all inspections as well, but not related to licenses and permit applications. So inspections can occur anywhere really, with or without an application for a license or a permit. And the inspection management app in Salesforce is customizable to fit all these use cases. Let's now take a look at the personas involved. So typically with inspections, on the constituent side will be the individual and the business owner. The government will be inspector, compliance officer, and inspection supervisors. And we've talked about what a constituent is. It's basically everyone who's involved with the processes externally, such as citizens, so you and me, tourists, business owners, their businesses, individuals, and in some cases even organizations. So here are some of the goals that the constituent is trying to achieve. So for them, they need to pass their inspection to avoid penalties and violations. If they do get one, they need to stay informed and have them resolved quite quickly. So what they want as a business owner and individual is that they don't want inspections to hold up the grand opening of their business, and they want to be checking the community site to track and resolve any enforcement actions that will prevent them from passing the inspection and getting the license. So from the business owner or individual's perspective, they need to understand, follow these regulations, address issues and violations that's been found during inspections, or if there's been complaint investigations that's been laid on them, managing follow-up with enforcement actions and paying fines, monitoring updates to regulations to ensure their business is always in compliance. So these are some of the challenges that they are faced with. Typically, to get their business license approved, they typically would need to go through multiple agencies. There's different processes that's all happening at once, and usually there's limited visibility into the process, the timing, and the status of the applications, and usually and there's issues with delays, missing due dates, for compliance actions, which will occur penalties or delay work, not familiar with the rules, and limited online options. As for the government inspector, when they've been assigned an inspection, what they want to do is they want to know everything that happened with the case very quickly to get up to date. And during the inspection, they want to be able to store these photos that they've taken on site, and also notes as well on the phone to reduce the time they need to spend manually adding these information to the system. So their goal is to complete all the inspections on time in the most efficient manner, and figuring out the best route to take to inspect multiple locations along the way. And what they do as an inspector is they plan and schedule inspections, do site visits, complete compliance assessments, report findings, and follow up on inspections ad hoc. Some of the pain points: there's lack of visibility from their side into past inspections, so inspection history and records. They might have trouble locating the inspection site, difficulty referencing regulatory information on site, inability to complete work on site, and quite often they need to manually transfer information such as data entry, photocopying, and filing carbon paper forms. And that sometimes they have to wait to report findings until they are back at the office, and they risk the quality of case information. And we also have compliance officer here as well. Their job is to basically enforce the findings and regulation on the constituents based on the inspector's results if required. So they are typically managing multiple applications in various stages of the process. They basically want to know which ones will require their attention. And they want to be able to have access to laws and policies easily. And their challenge is that their work is often delayed because they spend more time doing manual data entry and putting files in place. So their goal is to finish their review of field notes from inspections and investigations on time, and making sure everything is compliant with policies and procedures, and making sure applicants are addressing their violations and paying their fees. What they do as their job is they need to gather inputs from industry experts, reviewing the report findings, enforce regulations for violations, ensure these enforcement actions have taken place, managing issues, inquiries, appeals, and hearings. So their pain points are poor communication with the constituents and industry experts, and there is usually not enough time to coordinate and follow up on what's happening with enforcement actions, and they often have they often have difficulty priority cases, backlogs, and follow-ups. Adding to the mix, you have inspection supervisors, and these are the people that manages a team of inspectors who often visit different locations to conduct inspections. They want to inspection supervisors, they want to track their work and manage their workloads and new assignments. So when someone reaches out to inspection supervisor during the inspection supervisor want to access the laws and policies on the spot and get them answers without delay. So their goal is to basically optimize the amount of time their team spends on inspections and making sure they are all up to date on the latest regulations. Their jobs involve prioritizing inspections based on the risk and availability, managing the workload across the team, assign inspectors to cases, review the progress and result of each inspection, and staying current on the changes for regulations, guiding the support agents and solving issues and ensuring the enforcement of violations. And their pain points are having difficulty to scheduling high volumes of inspection across the team, lack of visibility into inspections, and lack of communication and alignment with inspectors and constituents. So notice how all of these stakeholders or personas, they are impacted with these legacy systems and points that are used to manage inspections. So with public sector solutions, a lot of these pain points can be resolved. So let's take a look at how the capabilities and architecture of PSS can support the inspections. Let's quickly go over the capabilities of the inspections app in Salesforce PSS. So it has the ability to assign inspections. So you can assign and provide inspections with view details, and it's available on both mobile and desktop. So this is quite useful when it comes to field inspections during site visits, ensuring the execution of all the required steps. And it also allows the inspectors to access the compliance and code lookups. And the desktop app gives employees the ability to handle all of the case information digitally, and it makes communicating with the constituent and experts across different channels a lot easier. There's also templates that you can use for more complicated assessments, for dynamic assessments. So these will basically contain assessment questions with conditional branching to ask the constituents. The app itself and the data model allows the inspectors and supervisors to access the code details to verify assessment against most updated regulations. You can upload photos, videos, files, and since everything is in one place, you have the 360 view of the applicant, the visits, the tasks on any device. You can enforce compliance and share feedback as well with constituents, and there is third-party app that you can use to allow for offline access. We've talked about the architecture earlier in the series, so I won't be going this in detail, but over here, this is the inspection management app that we are talking about. And underneath this, there's industry common layer that supports the apps and also the toolkit as well. And these two data models, will go over these in a bit more detail shortly. Now let's quickly go over the end-to-end process for inspection and management. So you'll start with an inspection supervisor. These people will schedule and assign inspections by creating assessment tasks via action plans. And for things that are a bit more periodic, they are related to licenses or permits, they set up automatic reminders or schedule inspections in advance. And then you have the inspectors who will review all the assigned inspections with case details and tasks. And on the day of the inspection, if it's a field visit, they'll typically use the Salesforce mobile to get the route directions to the assigned locations. They'll follow and complete the guided tasks that's shown in the mobile app and take photos and upload them, and also add additional notes and inspection findings. The compliance officer will conduct an inspection follow-up with the constituent to check that the enforcement actions they've been assigned correctly, and answer questions and ensure completion of these enforcement actions. And they'll determine the pass or fail status of the inspection and generate official documentation to notify the applicant of the inspection status and the next step. And when we are talking about the constituent in this process, they'll log into the community portal to review the status of the inspections, address any open violations as a result of the inspection, and they will get the electronic copies of their approved licenses and permits in some cases. So we've talked about the inspector a lot and the mobile app. Let's quickly go over the screenshots. So when you go on site, when you go and take a visit as an inspector, you'll have a map with the location of the inspection, and here you'll see the name of the place and also the time and the address. And here's just the Get Directions button, and here you can see the list of tasks that you need to carry out. So in this case, there's 4 of these, and under some of these there are specific assessments that's required. And when you get to the place, you can click on Start Visit, and the timer will start to calculate the time elapsed. So if we are looking at the first task here, EH representative, this is a signature task, and in here you can click on the Add Signature button to get the signature of the people that's required. So how do you create a new visit for the inspectors to go and carry out these tasks? So what you do is, one way to create a visit is from business license applications. So when you navigate to business license applications, when it's in the inspection phase, you can click on this button. Once you click on this button, a window will pop up, and there's different inspection types that different governing authority wants to provide compliance on. And here you'll populate details for places, the planned start time and end time, and include any special instructions. So inspections can happen at a place, which can be a location, it can be a known business address, or just an address. So the location can be a wing of an aircraft, so it doesn't always need to be an address. Different parts of the facility might have different inspections, where a team of inspectors are splitting up to the inspections of different locations and equipment. So here it's just an out-of-the-box window, out-of-the-box screen. The expectation usually is to use Flow or OmniScript to override this to make the requirements suit to automate the creation of the visit. So you might have a bit more fields over here and a few more questions as part of your flow or omit script. Alright, let's now take a look at action plans. We've covered this in episode 3 in industry common layers, so feel free to check that out if you would like to see more details. So action plans are basically used to set up tasks that the inspectors will need to go through during a site visit. And typically, the inspection type record uses something that's called action plan template. Action plan template is basically a reusable set of tasks that basically says, here is the checklist, and here are the things to assess, and here is what to do. So in this case, we have a food safety program official inspection report inspection type, and there's a associated action plan template as well. Let's now take a look at this action plan template record. So in this action plan template record, there are 3 sections: assessment task, definitions, tasks, and signature tasks. Assessment task definitions, there are 2 of these: preventing contamination by hand and employee health and hygiene practice. So assessment task definitions are basically used to put similar assessment indicator definitions together. So if we look at preventing contamination by hands, which is this one over here, we can see that there are 2 assessment indicator definitions in the related list. And what these assessment indicator definitions are is that these are the things that you need to look at, the inspectors will need to look at. So when you are looking at the action plan template, just think about assessment task definition as category of tasks that you'll need to carry out, and within each category there are specific things that the inspector will need to look at. And you have signature tasks that the inspector will need to go and get the signature from employees and age representative. And in this case, the later one is a required task. So let's take a look at the preventing contamination by hands assessment task definition record. So again, think about these as your as the category of a task category that the inspector will need to carry out on site. So by looking at this, it doesn't actually provide much details other than the category itself. To look at the details, which are basically assessment indicator definitions. So these are the things that the inspector will actually need to look at. So for example, preventing contamination by hands, the inspector will actually need to look at 2 things for this specific category, which is hands clean and properly washed, gloved, used properly, and adequate hand washing facilities supplied. So if we look at the first one over here, the assessment indicator definition record, when we look at the related list, we can see assessment indicator defined values and the regulatory code assessment indicators. So this over here, this is basically a list of possible answers that the inspector can record against this assessment indicator definition. So for example, if everything is clean and properly washed, if you use your gloves properly, then the inspector can put on compliance. There are options like not observed, out of compliance, major violation, and corrected on site. This regulatory code assessment indicator, this is a junction object that basically associate the assessment indicator definition and the regulatory code. So you can easily check the regulatory code that's associated with this particular thing that the inspector will need to look at to ensure compliance with the regulatory code. So when you look at the regulatory code, you can see the specific code name and the subject as well, and whether it's active or not, and the effective period. So the important thing to understand here is that the PSS inspection data model allows you to trace everything back to the regulatory code. And here is the data model to support inspection management. We'll go over this briefly on a high level, as we'll go over this in a bit more detail later on in the section. And we've covered some of these action plan data model in the previous episode number 3, Industry Common Layers. So we can see here we have the inspection type and visit that we've just talked about. Down here, there's action plan template data model that supports having a repeatable list of tasks to do when you go on a visit. There's the regulatory code model that allows you to refer to regulatory codes. And there's the violation data model to support when there's been violations associated with inspections. So inspection management is quite a big part of what government do. They look at issues to protect the community, making sure everyone is following the law. So now let's take a look at violations. So each business license applications can have many visits records. So a regulatory code violation is basically something that wasn't passed that's linked to a regulatory code. There's an out-of-the-box flow that looks at when assessment tasks failed. It looked at a regulatory code and create the corresponding regulatory code violation, which could associate with fees. So it could also be that it's not really a violation. It might be a recommendation, and they want to reschedule an inspection to see that they've remediated whatever was out of the compliance. So here is a visit record, and in the related list, there are assessment tasks, action plans, and regulatory code violations. So as part of the visit, quite often you need to generate some sort of documentation with the findings that was found on site. So what you can do is you can utilize the OMI Studio document generation, and you provide the context ID, which is the visit records ID, onto here, and OMI Studio document generation will basically give you a PDF result, and this is basically what's being shown over here. So you can see there's a couple of tasks that have been completed, and that's basically what's been shown over here. And this PDF view can also be viewed on the platform as well. Under the inspection management app, you can see that there's checking preventative measures, and underneath this there are 2 assessments and 2 violations as well, which are shown over here. And there's things to do with verify safety precautions, and there are 3 assessments. So these are the ones that's been shown over here: 3 assessments for verify safety precautions and 2 for checking preventative measures. and it's basically what's being shown over here as well. But this here doesn't show the breakdown of the assessment information. And this is the inspector's view. They can look at these assessment questions that they've got, which are these, and they can provide a response, upload files, or view the regulatory code that's associated with this question. Alright, let's now go over some Trailhead notes. To start with, I've got 4 Trailhead modules that I would recommend for you to go through. First one here is inspections with public sector solutions. Second one is dynamic assessments with public sector solutions, followed by licensing, permitting, and inspection data model in public sector solutions, and licensing, permitting, and inspection with public sector solutions. So I'll post these links in the description below or in the comments below. So make sure you go over these and have some hands-on experience with public sector data model and configuration. Alright, let's now take a look into the data model associated with inspections, assessments, and public complaints. We'll start with regulatory code violations. We can see this relationship between regulatory code violation with many different objects. So for example, a visit to the site can have many regulatory code violations. So for example, when you go on a visit to a new restaurant, it might be violating fire safety codes and a bunch of other codes, and this is where this data model will be able to manage this the recording of this data. And the same goes with business license applications and individual applications. These applications can also be associated with many different regulatory code violations. And this regulatory code violation is often belongs to a violation type. So for example, a health and safety code violation might be, you see some of the cleaning stations, it's not up to the standard, and the violation type for that regulatory code violation can be the health and safety type. We can also see that regulatory code can have many instances of regulatory code violations. So for example, fire safety code 112C can be violated many times, and these can be from inspections for business license application to open up a new restaurant, or individual application, or to do with an inspection or a visit to site. And as a result of violating regulatory codes, there is violation enforcement actions. So one regulatory code violation can have many of these violation enforcement actions, and this will contain actions that regulatory authority will take to address the violations. If you are preparing for the exam, the key objects here to get really familiar with is regulatory code assessment indicator and violation type assessment indicator. So regulatory code assessment indicator is a junction object between regulatory code and assessment indicator definition. And violation type assessment indicator is the junction object for between violation type and assessment indicator definition. So these two junction objects allows us to create many-to-many relationships between the objects. So for example, this regulatory code assessment indicator allows us to have many-to-many relationships between regulatory code and assessment indicator definition. And the same goes with violation type assessment indicator. It allows us to create many-to-many relationship between violation type and assessment indicator definition. Alright, so to be able to understand these two junction objects, we need to understand the assessment indicator definition object in detail. And we'll break this into two parts. Let's first understand regulatory code assessment indicator definition. So that's part one. Part two will then go into violation type assessment indicator and assessment indicator definition. And the best way to do this is through an example. So we'll start with the regulatory code, which is over here. So in the regulatory code object, we'll record things such as the name, active, effective, ineffective to, and the governing regulatory authority. Under the related list, there is the regulatory code assessment indicator. So this is the key junction object we are talking about over here. So what this allows us to do is that when we look at this, we can see two assessment indicator definitions. So this is this object over here. So this allows us to look at a regulatory code, and we can immediately know the two associated assessment indicator definitions. So what this means is that we can easily tell what criteria have been used to gauge whether a business or activity meets the regulatory code. So in this case, to be able to meet this regulatory code, there are two assessment indicator definitions that the inspector will be looking out for. So you can think of these as a checklist. So first one is are poison, toxic materials stored in accordance with the manufacturer storage instructions, blah blah blah. And the second one is the floors where services are performed of a material which is not porous or absorbent. Now, if we open up one of these regulatory code assessment indicator record, so we are now moving from regulatory code to this junction object over here. So when we look at this regulatory code assessment indicator, so we'll look at the first one here. So this one over here will have an ID, and this ID is basically the name for this regulatory code assessment indicator, and this basically establishes the many-to-many relationships between the regulatory code and assessment indicator definition, as you can see over here. So in this particular record, it's basically saying this assessment indicator definition is associated with the regulatory code, and this regulatory code is also associated with the assessment indicator definition. So in summary, what regulatory code assessment indicator junction object does is that it matches the regulatory code with its associated assessment indicator definitions, and the relationship we want to establish here is really because if we just look at the regulatory code itself, by itself, it provides reference to specific sections of the code. However, it doesn't include much details. So if you imagine you are an inspector, if you only look at the regulatory code, you wouldn't actually know what you need to carry out during the inspection. And therefore, there is a need for the assessment indicator definition, which is a more detailed checklist that basically tells you the criteria that the inspectors will need to use to gauge whether a business or activity meets the regulatory code. And therefore, there is a need to connect these two entities, the regulatory code and assessment indicator definition. And this also allows us to have this many-to-many relationship between them. It basically matches the regulatory code with the associated assessment indicator definitions and vice versa. So now if we look at the assessment indicator definition, so we are now moving from this junction object here into the assessment indicator definition. So this one is about the toxic materials. We can see the indicator field type. This is a Boolean, so it's either yes or no. And here again, we can see the related list, which is regulatory code assessment indicators. So this will actually help the inspector during the inspection to trace back to the associated regulatory code for any inspection task. And over here, the regulatory code assessment indicators, this is just an example of how it can marry up between regulatory code and assessment indicator definitions. So for example, here I can see for annual inspections, there are 5 criteria that the inspectors will be looking out for, and there's specific codes and the associated criteria. Now that we understand this part of the data model, we'll now dive into assessment indicator definition, violation type assessment indicator, and violation type. So again, we'll start with examples. So we'll start with violation type. So here's the violation type record. In here, you can record the name, in this case, health and safety. You can record the type and severity as well. Under the related list, you can see regulatory code violations, which is this over here. And you can also see the junction object violation type assessment indicator, which is these ones. So in this case, there are actually 3 violation type assessment indicators associated with this particular violation type. So the 3 assessment indicator definitions is the 6-foot marketing system, something to do with monitoring, and line leak detectors. So if we take a look at the first violation type assessment indicator here, it'll lead us to this record. And this record is basically, so this is a junction object, and now we are over here. So we've moved from violation type to this junction object now. So this junction object essentially pairs each violation type with its corresponding assessment indicator definition. So it's a bit like the regulatory code example that we just gone through. So when you look at the regulatory code itself, it doesn't provide a lot of details for the inspector or for people that are working internally. For example, it can be a supervisor or a coordinator. So similar to that concept, violation type itself, it doesn't provide much details. So if we look at health and safety, it doesn't actually tell us too much. So hence, there is a need for more details, and this is where the assessment indicator definition comes in. So now we are talking about this object here. So this object will basically provide the detailed criteria for what constitutes a violation of this type. So in this example, is there a 6-foot marketing system? If the answer is no, then you'll basically be violating health and safety violation. So therefore, there's a need to link these two components, and this is where we need this junction object here to have this many-to-many relationship between the assessment indicator definition and violation type. So if we go and look at the assessment indicator definition, we can see the name and a bit more details. So this one here is to do with social distancing. You need to have a place for people to wait in line, and the type here is Boolean, so it's a yes or a no. And over here, when we look at the assessment indicator definition, which is this here, in the related list, again, we can see the violation type assessment indicators, and this points back to the violation type here, which is health and safety. So what this allows us to do is that when the inspector looks at this assessment indicator definition, if it's a fail, then we know that if it's a false or a fail, then we know that you are violating this particular violation type, which is health and safety. And you'll also notice here that it's also associated with regulatory co-assessment indicators, which is what we've basically covered over here. So basically, this object here is associated with two junction objects, and in summary, it does two jobs. So it provides details of the regulatory code and also detailed criteria for what constitutes a specific violation type. So to break this down, assessment indicator definition is a specific criteria that you use to gauge whether a business or activity meets the regulatory codes, and you can understand this from looking at this related list over here. So you look at regulatory code, and you can look at a bunch of assessment indicator definitions that are used for gauging whether an activity or business is meeting this regulatory code. The second thing that it's providing here is it provides specific criteria used to detail what constitutes a violation type. So if we move to the violation type example here, we look at the violation type here, we can see the three assessment indicators. So what this is saying is that these three assessment indicator definitions are basically used to detail what constitutes a specific violation type. So in this case, it's health and safety. Let's now summarize all of this with an example. So we'll be using the visit object to record an inspector's visit. And in this example, the inspector visits a salon who's submitting a business license application. And the inspector's job is to determine whether the business license application meets the regulatory code or not. And the regulatory code we are looking at here is from this particular chapter and article, and it's from the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. And the detail of the code basically states that every establishment needs to provide convenient hand washing facilities, and it needs to have running water, soap, etc., etc. So the inspector can reference this code during the site visit. Now, if we only look at this description here, the inspector wouldn't actually know what things that he or she needs to look at. And this is where the regulatory code assessment indicator comes in. So when the inspector looks at a regulatory code, the regulatory code assessment indicator related list will display the 3 assessment indicator definitions that the inspector will need to inspect. So for example, a sink with running water is present, soap is available, and towel or an air hand dryer are present. So during the site visit, the inspector will basically check each of these indicators. So based on the inspector's findings, there might be regulatory code violations. So failure to provide, for example, hand washing facilities, or if towels, hand dryers aren't present, the inspector will mark it as a regulatory code violation. And the regulatory code violation is usually associated with a violation type. So in this case, the violation type is health and safety violation. And this violation type assessment indicator will basically show the assessment indicator definitions that are associated with the health and safety violation type. So because this inspection results in regulatory code violations, there are some violation enforcement actions as a result of this. And in this case, it's a fine of $500 for not providing adequate and convenient hand washing facilities. Alright, now let's take a look at assessments. So now we'll be talking about inspections and visits, and action plans as well. So we'll be going over the data model in detail, and when we are going over these, I'll also be explaining the Salesforce records as examples to make you understand the data model a lot easier. So let's get into it. So on a high level, this visit data model, inspection data model is basically divided into 3 sections. You have the action plan section, which is your action plan template, action plan version, action plan, and action plan item. And you have your visits part, which is your visit account inspection type. And the rest will be around inspection tasks. So this makes up the top half of the data model. So we'll start with action plan template. So it basically serves as a blueprint for creating action plans quickly and consistently. It ensures that some of the common tasks are defined, and therefore reducing the need to start from scratch each time a new action plan is created. So imagine if you have an action plan template for restaurant inspections. this template includes tasks like check fire extinguishers, inspect kitchen hygiene, and verify emergency exit. So this template ensures that every restaurant inspection covers these critical tasks without having to manually define them each time. And now we'll take a look at action plan template version. So multiple versions of an action plan template can exist. Each version can lead to different action plan instances, allowing for updates or improvements over time. So action plan, we've covered this earlier, and also in the industry common layer video as well. Action plans can be created from action plan template and can be customized based on the specific needs of a visit. So let's use the restaurant inspection action plan template as an example again. You can use this to create an action plan for a specific restaurant inspection. So this action plan might include additional tasks unique to this particular restaurant, like check outdoor seating safety. The core tasks will still come from the template, but you can tailor to your specific visit or inspection needs. So let's take a look at some Salesforce records. So here we have an action plan template, and you can see a few assessment task definitions, which we'll get to shortly, and there's a few tasks and signature tasks as well. And here is an example of an action plan. It shows you the target record. In this case, the target record is actually business license applications instead of a visit. And therefore, you'll notice that the items here, the sections, this looks slightly different from this over here. So if we were to have an action plan with the target record of visit, then you'll look a lot similar to this. So an important point to note is that different target records will actually give you different action plan template items or action plan items. All right, let's go back to the data model and have a look at the visit section. So a visit is basically an inspection. An account can have multiple visits, and each visit can be associated with different action plans. So for example, a restaurant chain has multiple locations which are represented by accounts. Each location requires a series of inspections or visits to ensure compliance before they can open. So for each visit, an action plan is created using the templates. The first visit might focus on fire safety. The second visit might focus on code compliance and so on. We also have this inspection type object, and there is one-to-many relationship between inspection type and visit. The inspection type object helps you to put visits into various categories. So one of the inspection types could be health inspection. The health inspection type can include instances like quarterly health inspection for downtown branch and annual health inspection for the uptown branch. Now let's talk about assessment tasks. So within each visit, multiple assessment tasks outline the tasks that needs to be performed during the inspection. So for example, for the quarterly health inspection of the downtown branch, the assessment tasks might include inspect food storage areas, check hand washing station, and test water temperature. So each task specifies what the inspector needs to do, and these tasks can include things like, getting the signatures and performing specific checks, which will be represented by the inspection assessment indicator. Before we move on to assessment task definition, let's take a look at what the visit object actually looks like in a Salesforce record. So here is an example of the visit object. So to create an action plan, you can click on the new plan button over here, and you can actually create multiple of them. So what we are talking about here is this one-to-many relationship between the visit and the action plan. So once the action plan has been created and the visit is planned, if you go to the inspection app, you'll see this inspector's view, where in the tasks tab you'll have a list of assessment tasks, and these are what we are talking about over here, where a visit can have multiple assessment tasks. And these will determine these are all the things that the inspector will need to do. And within each task, some of these have assessments, and we'll get into this in a bit. So if we just look at this employee health and hygiene practices, it doesn't actually tell the inspector exactly what to check, and this is where the assessment indicator definition comes in. Right. Before we get to assessment indicator definitions, we need to understand the assessment task definition, and also the junction object that joins the assessment indicator definition together with the assessment task definition, and also the junction object here for inspection assessment indicator. So assessment task definitions, these basically group similar assessment indicator definitions together. Assessment task definition defines what needs to be checked during an inspection. So the difference between assessment task definition and assessment task is that assessment task represents the actual task that's required for the visit. So we are talking about these ones, they are showing up on the visit's record. While the assessment task definition serves as a template that defines what needs to be done in an assessment. So you can almost think of assessment task definition as action plan template, and assessment task as your action plan. So having this structure ensures that these assessment tasks can be standardized through reusable definitions while maintaining flexibility for individual inspections or assessments. So what does this actually mean? So for example, the assessment task definition name might be checking for the fire exit, but in your visit you actually want to be more specific. So this is where assessment task comes in, because assessment task is what will be displayed as the task for the visit. So you can actually have a more specific name. For example, check-in file exit at level 10, which is more applicable for your visit. So let's take a look at some Salesforce records, and this will make a lot more sense. So everything we are looking at here, these are, as we mentioned earlier, these are assessment tasks. So when you click on this, you probably need to go out of the inspection app to be able to look at the assessment task details. Otherwise, you'll go into the inspector view. So when you use a different app, for example, license and management, you click on the assessment task, you can see it's related to assessment task definition, which is what we are looking at over here. So in this example, the assessment task definition is actually employee health and hygiene practice. But perhaps for this particular visit, we want to specify that this is hygiene practice for summer, because things might be different. For summer, you might need to check for additional things. So when you have this name updated on your visit, under the tasks, you'll actually see this for summer text coming up as your assessment task. And if you compare this with what we had before, so this does not have the for summer text for this assessment task, and so this was actually before me adding the for summer in the name. Right, now that we understand the difference between assessment task and assessment task definition, we can go a bit deeper and look at the assessment indicator definition. Right, so assessment indicator definition. So these are the indicators that need to be assessed for the assessment task definition. So for example, under the inspect food storage area assessment task or assessment task definition, one of the assessment indicator definitions might be verify that the food is stored at a safe temperature. This indicator helps the inspector determine if the restaurant is following the food safety regulations. So the assessment indicator definitions are linked to the assessment task definition through the structure object called assessment task indicator definition object, which controls the relationship and also the display order. So this is important for the exam. You need to know this junction object and what it's called. So let's take a look at some Salesforce records. So again, you will need to be outside the inspection app, and when you look at this assessment task, so we are looking at this over here, and when we go into the assessment task definition, which is employee health and hygiene practices, and we're talking about this over here, which we'll need to remember. This serves as a template that defines what needs to be done in the assessment. So when we look into this assessment task definition, this is the record over here, and when we look at the related list, we can see two assessment indicator definitions, and assessment indicator definitions are over here. So this related list over here is basically showing you the assessments that the inspectors will need to carry out for this assessment task. And this display order over here that we talked about. And these two assessment indicator definitions are what is appearing when you click on this assessment task. You'll see these two assessment tasks. You see these two assessment indicator definitions. So no discharge from eyes, hands clean and properly washed, and that is basically what's appearing over here. And in here we set in the no discharge as display order 1 and hands clean as display order 2, and that's the ordering that we are seeing over here. So if you were to add another question over here, what you have to do is you need to click on the add, and this is where the junction object will appear, which is assessment task indicator definition, and this is where we are looking at. So this basically will allow you to choose a assessment indicator definition, and we'll be linking that to the assessment task definition. Right, let's go back to the data model. Right, so now we understand this relationship over here between the assessment task definition and the assessment indicator definition. Now we can talk about the section over here. So with each assessment indicator definition, there are assessment indicator defined values. So these are basically the predefined values of what can be captured as an assessment indicator value, which is this over here. So assessment indicator value is what the inspector will respond to an assessment indicator definition. So for example, the assessment indicator definition can be verified that the food is stored at a safe temperature. The assessment indicator defined value can be food is stored at safe temperature and food is not stored as safe temperatures. So in this case, you have two assessment indicator defined values. And let's take a look at assessment indicator value as well. So this basically lists the target or captured value that are defined as part of an assessment indicator definition for single or multi-select questions. So assessment indicator definition doesn't just need to be a single question. It can also be a multi-select where you'll have multiple assessment indicator defined values that you can select from, and you can select more than one as your assessment indicator value, which is basically the inspector's response to the assessment indicator definition. Right, so for example, the assessment indicator definition can be what storage device types you have in the restaurant. That is over here. And assessment indicator defined values can be fridge, freezer, mini freezer, none. And assessment indicator value can be mini freezer and fridge that the inspector have selected for this particular indicator assessment indicator definition. Alright, now let's have a look at some Salesforce records. Again, we'll start from assessment indicator definition. So from the previous example where we were looking at the assessment task definition, which is over here. Now we'll be selecting one of the assessment indicator definitions, and we'll look into that record in detail, and we'll be selecting this one that's in display order number 2, which is about hands clean and properly washed. So when we take a look at this assessment indicator definition, we can see it's a pick list, and these are all the available values for the inspectors to select from, and these are defined in assessment indicator defined values, which is over here. So for example, it can be in compliance, not observed, out of compliance, major violation, and corrected on site. Now let's move back to the data model and talk about one of the most important objects in this data model, which is inspection assessment indicator. So this object associates the assessment indicator definition with the assessment task. There is also one-to-many relationship between the inspection assessment indicator and assessment indicator value, which is the capture values from the single or multi-select questions. So basically the inspector's response to the assessment indicator definition. So what this object allows us to do is that it allows the inspector to select responses for the assessment indicator definitions included in the assessment task. And this is basically what we are talking about over here. So this view that we are seeing over here, this is possible due to the inspection assessment indicator object. So when you click on the assessment task in inspection app, all the assessment indicator definitions will appear with options that are defined in assessment indicator value. So what we are talking about here is that when you have your inspection app open, and when you click on the assessment task, you'll basically see this window over here, which will show your assessment indicator definitions. And these indicator definitions will have a drop down that will allow the inspector to select the response. And the drop down values that are available, these are defined in assessment indicator defined value. So as we talked about earlier, we have 5 of these options. And when the inspector selects a value, so in this case, not observed, this will be stored in the assessment indicator value object. And this is what we are talking about here. So the responses for the assessment indicator definition will be stored in the assessment indicator value. And this inspector assessment indicator record has, I'll probably get to that in a bit actually. So let's go back to the record here. So when we look at this inspection assessment indicator, which is this key object that we are talking about, this inspector here is related to this assessment task, which is preventing contamination by hands. And it's also associated with this assessment indicator definition, which is hands clean and properly washed, gloves used properly. And this is basically what we are seeing over here in the inspector's view. We are seeing the assessment task over here and the assessment indicator definition over here. And when you look at the related list in the inspection assessment indicator, you see the assessment indicator value, which is this over here. So this will store the response for the assessment indicator definition. So the response from the inspector, basically. And what you can see over here is that we've selected 2, which is not observed. And that's shown by this assessment indicator defined value, which is which you can basically look up over here. And this not observed value is basically what's being selected in the inspections app. So in summary, this inspector assessment indicator allows the inspector to be able to have this view of the assessment task and all the related inspection questions. In this case, there's only one, and it also allows the response to be stored in the related record, which is assessment indicator value. So one important thing I want to cover here is that this inspection assessment indicator has a field called assessment question status field. This is quite important for the exam, so make sure you know this quite well. So this is basically a pick this field that stores values such as pass, fail, not applicable issues, etc. What it is when we look at this inspector assessment indicator, you see this assessment question status field, and this is basically storing your response from the assessment result. So in this case, if it's not self, then it's probably not applicable. But in some other cases, for example, if the response to this assessment indicator definition is for example out of compliance, then we might want to select fail as the assessment result. And this is the object manager and the assessment question status field, and this is where you can actually define the pick this values, and here you can select violations, which will automatically create related regulatory code violations, which we'll get into in a bit in the next section. Now that we've understand how visits and inspections work, let's talk about public complaints. So what happens when someone files a complaint with a government agency? So what we've got here is the complaints data model. So when someone files a complaint against a business or establishment, which is usually represented by the account object, the government usually has to send an inspector out for a visit, and as part of the visit, depending on the inspector's findings, there might be regulatory code violations, and there could be associated enforcement actions, fines, which will be represented by regulatory transaction fees and also the transaction fee items. So let's take a look at example. So for example, one of the hair salons is making a client unhappy, and the reason for that is because they couldn't find a toilet and they filed a complaint against the salon. So let's take a look at what the complaint looks like and what the investigation looks like in public sector solutions, public complaints data model. So usually a constituent would go onto a portal hosted by Experience Cloud to file a complaint. And the account would usually be the business. In this case, it's the hair salon. The regulatory authority here is would be the authority that governs the regulatory code. In this case, that's the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. So as part of the complaint, the regulatory authority or the governing body will need to send someone out for an inspection, and this is where the visit object comes in. A visit will be scheduled to the salon to see if the signage and everything is up to code. And we have the regulatory code over here. So there's specific codes that governs, in this case, the signage for the restaurant, or the restroom or the toilet. And as part of the inspection, there could be regulatory code violations. So for example, in this case, the inspector defined that there is failure to display proper signage, and as part of this there's violation enforcement action. So in this case, a fine has been issued, and there is associated fees and transaction fee items. So for example, the transaction fee would be that the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology levies a fine on the salon because it failed to display signs directing the client to the restroom. And the transaction fee item would be the actual amount. So in this case, it's $100 for failing to display the signs directing the client to the restroom. And one thing that's also quite important that's not covered over here is that when the constituent go on the Experience Cloud website, when they fill up some sort of form, it'll generate this public complaint record. And from there, the internal case management team would create a visit from the public complaint record page, and from there, the inspector would go out and start investigating. And as part of this, there could be violations and fees, etc. And during the inspection, the inspectors will also have access to the regulatory code as well. Right, moving on. So over here, we'll be looking at business license applications and individual license applications. So for example, in this case, we have a hair salon, and what they are wanting to do is that they want to open another location. And as part of this, they need to create a business license application in order to do this. So with business license, applications, there's account. So in this case, it will be the salon, which is a business account, and the contact. So whoever is applying for the business license applications or key contacts within the salon business. And as part of this business license applications, from the regulatory authority, which is over here, they'll have codes that the business will need to meet before it can open, and they also they also can issue different licenses, and these are your regulatory authorization types. So we've covered this earlier in the previous video where we talked about licensing and permits. So basically, you can see there's this one-to-many relationships here, and also one-to-many relationships between regulatory authority and regulatory authorization type. So what this is saying basically is that a regulatory authority can have the ability to issue different types of permits and licenses, and each licenses usually have many different business license applications wanting to get that license. So to determine if the business license application meets all the regulatory codes and standards, the governing body will be sending someone out for inspection, and this is represented by the visit object. And as part of this, there's assessment tasks, and within the assessment tasks, there are specific inspection tasks that the inspectors will need to carry out, and depending on the results, there can be violations and enforcement actions as well. And as we talked about earlier, you have assessment indicator definitions, and these are basically the outcome of the assessment for a particular inspection assessment indicator, which is basically a sub-task of the assessment task. And let's now take a look at individual license. So you can see the two data models are quite similar. The only difference is that you have individual application here, and this is personal account instead of business account. So the example we have here is that someone wants to remodel the kitchen, and as part of this, they'll need to apply for a home remodeling permit. So this is where they would go to a portal and submit an individual application. And again, as part of this, the regulatory authority or the governing body will need to send someone out for a visit, and there's a bunch of indicators that the inspector will need to assess, and depending on the result, there can be violations or enforcement actions that the person will need to undertake to be able to get the individual application approved. Now let's take a look at inspections and dynamic assessments. Now with public sector solutions accredited professional exam, it doesn't actually cover dynamic assessments, but I'll quickly go over here just to provide some overview and the difference between inspections and dynamic assessments. So you will use the visit record, which is inspections when the inspection is straightforward. And when it's more complex and you need more inspection details and things that will change depending on conditions, this is where you will use dynamic assessments. So the main difference is that dynamic assessments use use this dynamic forms built using Omni scripts. So within Omni scripts, you can include assessment questions, and also you can add dependencies and conditional logic. With inspections, usually you will have a fixed set of assessment questions with responses in different formats. One big difference in terms of configuration is that it's a lot easier to set up inspections, but to set up dynamic assessments, it requires a much higher level of admin setup and configuration. Alright, let's go through the rest quickly, as we've probably covered most of these already. So let's take a look at the regulatory framework. So the first thing that you'll need to do to set up your visits or your action plans is that you need to create regulatory authorities. Examples are Board of Barbering and Cosmetology, Board of Medicine, etc. Once you've done this, you'll need to create and define regulatory codes and associate the codes to the relevant regulatory authority. After this is done, you need to start thinking about what sort of indicators or assessments the inspectors will need to perform on site. So this is where you will create the assessment indicator definitions. So for example, things like what is the condition of plumbing fixtures, and then you'll be entering the description and also defining the potential, defining the available values that the inspector can select from to respond to this assessment indicator definition. So in this case, it can be no cracks observed as cracks or water leakage observed. And you can define the sequence number as well. So these sequence numbers would be how the PSS values will appear in terms of the ordering. And this is what this assessment indicator definition looks like. You would have the name here, description here, and the indicator field type. And this is the assessment indicator definition that we are talking about here. When you have a look at the related list, you can see that we've defined 3 possible options and the sequence number as well. And we've also defined the regulatory code assessment indicators so that the inspectors can look at this assessment indicator definition and know which regulatory code is will provide more details regarding this particular task that the inspector needs to carry out. Right, so we've covered a lot of this already, so I won't go into this into too much detail. So let's move on to the next part. So now we need to group these assessment indicator definitions into a task definition, and this is the object that we are talking about here. So we've created a bunch of these and we're trying to group them into this. So for example, an assessment task definition can be salon health and safety standards. So this is usually something that's quite generic. And over here, you would have the assessment indicator definitions. So earlier on, we've created this plumbing fixtures assessment indicator definition. earlier, and we are now also adding another one into this assessment task definition via this junction object, and this junction object will give you the ability to link the assessment indicator definition and specify the ordering. And this is what it looks like. So when you have this assessment task definition created, this is what it looks like. And once you have associated your assessment indicator definitions with the assessment task, when you go and have a look at the related list, you'll be able to see the two subtasks that you'll need to carry out for this assessment task definition. So depending on the outcome of the inspection, there might be violations that will need to be created, and this is where you would go into the inspection assessment indicator and define the assessment question status and flag whether certain statuses are violations. So when this is ticked, you'll automatically create the violation when this assessment question status is selected during the inspection. Right, so now we have all the assessment task definition, indicator, assessment indicator definitions, and all the values defined. We can now create our action plan templates and visits. So start by creating the action plan template, and this is what it looks like. You'll start adding assessment task definitions onto the template, and this is what it looks like for your action plan template. And once you are happy with the template, you would publish it. So in this case, we've got one assessment task definition. So this is what we've been talking about earlier, which is this one over here, and we have also added a signature task, and both have been marked as required. So once you've published this, you'll need to now create an inspection type, and the reason for that is that you need to define inspection types to represent the various types of inspections required to issue licenses and permits. So we've created an inspection type for premises inspection spot check. Now we are ready to create inspection visit. So when you create a visit, usually you'll be associated with a business license application or individual application, and we have the visit type, which is the inspection type that we created earlier. And to create an action plan for the visit, you click on the new plan button over here, and you'll see this view over here. There's the assessment task that we've created earlier, and the signature task is now showing up as well. And you'll see a bunch of other things like document checklist item, tasks, and generic assessment tasks. Generic assessment task is usually used to include an OMI assessment task, which contains dynamic assessment. And dynamic assessment or discovery framework is not covered for the PSS public sector's exam at the moment. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about preparing for the exam, but it's good to understand how it works from the action plan's perspective. So once the action plan has been created, this will be what your visit record will look like. You'll see the action plan over here, the items that will need to be completed. In this case, 1 and 2. So you have two items that the inspectors will need to carry out. Right, moving on. So to conduct an inspection using the visit record that we've just created, we need to go to the inspection management app, and here you see we have one inspection scheduled for today, and when you open this, you'll see the 2 tasks that you need to carry out, and the first one here has 2 subtasks, and these are basically what we've defined earlier on. And depending on the inspection, we might need to there might be violations or enforcement actions, and to review this, you would go into the record and take a look at the visit and the violations that sits underneath it. Let's quickly go over dynamic assessments. I know it's not covered in the exam, but it's good to get a good understanding of how it works. So dynamic assessments, also known as discovery frameworks, it allows you to build an OmniScript form very quickly using assessment questions. And to be able to do this, you'll need to go to Setup and enable these discovery framework general settings, and the users will require 2 permission sets: dynamic assessment access or industry assessment. And from here, again, we'll need to set up questions and regulatory codes. Once the assessment questions have been created, you need to associate questions with the regulatory codes, and this is what it looks like. You have your assessment question, and you have the assessment question versions, and when you look at the assessment question version, which is essentially what will appear on the discovery framework OmniScript form, in the related list, you can see a regulatory code users related list, where you can see the specific regulatory code associated with this assessment question. Right, so how do we actually include these assessment questions that we've created onto the action plan form? So here is the data model. You can see we have this Omni assessment task, and you can see this is associated with action plan item and also the visit record. So first you need to create an Omni assessment task. So in this case, we are doing some sort of fire safety and building standards assessment. So once this has been created, you'll need to add the assessment questions that you've created earlier into this Omni assessment task. So once you've added all your questions to the Omni assessment task, you can now build an action plan. So again, start by creating an action plan template. And earlier we talked about to include dynamic assessment or discovery framework OmniScript questions to the action plan template, we need to create a new generic assessment task. And this is where you will select this OMI assessment task and select the generic assessment tasks, which is Fire Safety and Building Standards Assessment, and this will allow you to add these tasks onto your action plans. So over here, now we are ready to create an inspection visit. So in this case, the visit will be for a business license application for a salon. So when we are ready, we click on new, and this would create us a new visit. And from there, again, we need to create an action plan. Once it's created, you'll appear over here. So far we've been talking about visit-based dynamic assessments. In this section, we'll quickly go over scenarios where we can actually use dynamic assessments for non-visit based scenarios. So, for example, if someone wants to file a complaint over the phone or through the public portal to register their concerns, this is a good non-visit based dynamic assessments use case. And we can also use this to register some preliminary information regarding the issue as well. And it's important to note that at this stage, dynamic assessments can work with these objects: business license applications, individual applications, care plans, public complaints, and visits. So now that we are dealing with public complaints, we need to create an OMI script to collect this information. So the process is actually very similar to visits, where you need to create a discovery framework OMI script and add your assessment questions in there, and also apply conditional logic that's required if you need to display some of the questions conditionally. And once you've built your discovery framework OMI script, you configure the action plan template, create new generic assessment task, and add the OMI assessment task into that generic assessment task so that it's included in your action plan template. Once this is done, we are ready to apply this action plan to a public complaint. So similar to how you can add a new action plan to a visit, we are doing the same with the public complaint record. And this is essentially what we are talking about over here. And that's it. So we've covered all the details and data models that's covered in Trailhead. One very important thing to know for the exam is that you need to know these built-in LWCs for the inspection management app. So you need to know that this visits page is made out of 3 key LWC components. You have the inspection over here, inspection action component here, the inspection tab container over here showing a list of assessment tasks that the inspector will need to carry out, and we also have the inspection details over here displaying the address and the time. Now let's review the data model for regulatory area, fees, and enforcement. So this data model is divided into a few main sections. You have the applications, which is your business license applications or individual applications, and these will be either from your business account or personal account. So this is the constituent part. And you have the regulatory area, and this is about the regulatory authority and the type of permits that they are managing, which is represented by regulatory authorization type. And there's different requirements for different business types. For example, if you are a hair salon, you might need to get a fire permit, or you might need to get a fire permit and a building consent, for example. And this is managed using the business regulatory authorization type and junction object, which basically links the business type with the regulatory authorization type that tells you exactly what licenses that a business will require to be able to operate. So we have the visit, which is the inspection, and depending on the result of the visit, there can be fees that's required, or there can be code violations which can result in violation enforcement actions. And there is also the violation type that put these regulatory code violations into different categories, and these regulatory code violations would be as a result of breaking a regulatory code, which is governed by the Regulatory Code Authority. So if everything goes well and the inspection has passed, you would be granted a license or permit. So, and hence this relationship over here, the constituent will be the owner of the license or the permit. Alright, let's now review the visits, inspection, and dynamic assessments data model. So again, this is broken down into a few sections. We have visit, inspections, action plans, dynamic assessments, and regulatory enforcement. So we'll start with the visit object. You can have multiple action plans, and each action plan can have multiple action plan items. The action plan items can be made out of assessment task or the Omni assessment task, which is dynamic assessment or discovery framework, where it includes a bunch of assessment questions. When we look at the assessment task, we've talked about this in detail in today's section, so I won't cover this in detail, but basically what we've got here is within each assessment task, there is detailed subtasks, and from there you can specify the available options, and there's objects there that would, which is inspection assessment indicator, that would allow the inspector to respond to the question. And depending on the response of these assessment task questions, there can be violations, and as part of the violation, there can be associated enforcement actions. And these violations will be governed by regulatory codes, and these are details about how it should be used. And there's also violation type that puts these regulatory code violations into groups. Alright, let's now take a look at the public complaints data model. So again, this is divided into a few different areas. You have the visit, applications, constituent, regulatory enforcement, complaint, and case. So again, we'll start with the public complaint. So public complaints can be associated with multiple cases, and this is where this complaint case comes in. It's a junction object that allows this many-to-many relationship. And with public complaints, there can be many complaint participants, and these people can be constituents or actual account or business. So as part of public complaints, there can be it can be in context of the regulatory code violations, and these violations can be subject of these individual business license applications. And these applications can be associated with cases, and these cases, there's relationship between these cases and the public complaints, and these are done via these PSS objects. Within each complaint case, there can be case participants, and these again are linked to contacts or accounts. And you have the interaction summaries. They'll allow you to create events or tasks. They'll give you a good overview of what's going on in the public complaint or the case records. Alright, with all of this, let's go over the LPI hands-on exercises. These exercises are actually quite similar to the ones on Trailhead, so I'll go over this very quickly. So over here we have a regulatory code record, and you can see the regulatory authority over here. So in this case, we have the Department of Building Inspections that's associated with the specific regulatory code. So when we look at a regulatory authority, we can see all the codes they are associated with this authority, and these codes are what the authority enforces. We can also see the regulatory authorization types. So these are the permits or licenses that the regulatory authority can issue. So in this case, this regulatory authority can issue petroleum tank permit. Now, over here we are creating assessment indicator definitions. So in this case, we are creating an assessment criteria for the inspectors to check ventilation in the building. And this criteria, we are defining two possible options that the inspector can select from. So so these are at least 3 windows on each floor, less than 3 windows on each floor. And on the assessment indicator definition, you can see this regulatory code assessment indicators where you can refer to a particular regulatory code to get more details. And here we have the assessment task definition, which is you can think of this as the parent for the assessment indicator definition. So this assessment task definition will contain multiple assessment indicator definitions, which are basically subtasks, specific criteria that the inspectors will be looking at when it's carrying out this assessment task. And this is basically what I've just talked about. In this case, there are 2 assessment indicator definitions, so two things that the inspectors will need to assess on. So now we've created the assessment task and set up the assessment indicator definitions. We are ready to set up the action plan template and visit. So we created a action plan template record, and in our action plan template we've added the assessment task definition and also a signature task. Also creating an inspection type as well for the visit. So in this case, we have a business license application And to create a visit for this business license application, we click on this new button, this create new visit button. Once this is clicked, you'll create a visit record and it will be linked to the account, the location, and also the business license application and the inspection type as well. So to create an action plan for the visit, again, click on the new action plan, the new plan button. Once this is done, the inspector on site will have the inspection management app, and they'll see this inspection scheduled for today. When this is clicked, you'll be able to start the visit. Once you start the visit, you can go through and carry on to finish these tasks. So when you click on the first assessment task, you'll see these two questions, and you'll be able to select responses for these and also the assessment results. And depending on the assessment results and how it's defined in the assessment question status, you'll be creating violation records. So for example, if we select this as fail or issue, you will be creating violation records. And this is just a signature task, and that's the second task for this visit. And that's it for the LPR exercise. So highly recommend you going through this, as this will really help with your exam. And that wraps up the 5th video in our series. In the next video, we'll dive into PSS data models and applications for grants management, where I'll cover the data model and its use cases. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more people to discover free Salesforce study resources and motivates me to create more valuable content for our community. See you next time.